Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Well, Mama don't allow no modern houses going on. Mama don't allow no modern houses going on. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna love my modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no modern houses going on.
Welcome to US Modernist Radio. Join George Smart and Frank King as they talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Today, we welcome actress and iconic homeowner Kelly Lynch and the president of Preservation North Carolina, Myrick Howard. And now, the archivist Dwell magazine called The Lorax for Modern Designed Houses, along with the comedian who has appeared on more cruise ships than norovirus, George Smart and Frank King.
Hey, welcome, podcast listeners. I'm George Smart, and with me is my good friend, Frank King.
Hi there, hey there, ho there.
Frank, how long have we known each other now?
I was doing a little math before the show. I think it's 50 years. As a matter of fact, I've known you since Walter Gropius was a little boy. Since this is one of our early shows, I should tell you that George and I know each other because our folks knew each other. And I think your dad had worked for the News Observer briefly as a photographer and took a picture of me in Santa Claus's arms or on his lap in downtown Raleigh in 1961. And actually appeared in the newspaper. Anyway, that's the family history.
All right. Well, we're going to be talking about something that, to be very honest, is not for everyone. Those that love it, really, really love it, and the rest of America, well, not so much. We're talking about modernist architecture, specifically houses. Those oddball, sometimes controversial homes and buildings in every major city that inspire us, divide us, and cause otherwise rational people to start podcasts. US Modernist Radio is brought to you by ModboxUSA.com. Turn your mailbox into a Modbox with one of Modbox USA's colorful, stylish, retro, mid-century modern mailboxes that complement your home's modern aesthetic and turns mail time into party time. See one now at ModboxUSA.com. And by Sarah Sonk. Is your modernist home a work of art? Well, when it's time to sell, listing a known isn't going to be enough. Reach out to an agent who loves modernist houses with the expertise, experience, and track record to close your deal. She's Sarah Sonk, 919-601-7339. And now here's Frank with the Modernist News.
And sounder, Tom?
That's going to be added in post.
Oh,
Imagine me going, except
that would be
better.
Dateline, Brownsville, Texas, the Krager House. It's one of Brownsville's only modernist homes. Big surprise there. And its legacy begins with Richard Neutra, a 20th century architect. Neutra built the home for Pan American World Airways manager George Krager, who requested it being constructed in Brownsville in 1936. Recently, and this is the reason it's in the news, perps were able to cut the lock from the gate, cut some electrical wiring, and make off with three 6,000-pound air conditioning units. 6,000 pounds sounds like a lot for an AC unit, but bear in mind, these were installed in 1936 and were coal-fired. Playmobil finally got the memo about luxury real estate and has rolled out its modern luxury mansion playhouse for the cool price of, wait for it, $419.89. The press release promises a bunch of generally amazing design moves to a perhaps unreceptive audience of 3-year-olds, mid-century furniture, Corbusier-style windows, spacious floor plans, and according to the designers, a distinct Bauhaus influence. My feeling is, if you want to spend $400 on a 3-year-old, buy a bottle of Glenlivet. And finally, developers in Switzerland have announced plans to build the world's tallest hotel in a tiny alpine village called Vals. The tower's designer, Tom Main, said it is a, quote, minimalist act, end quote, that will blend in with the Alps because, quote, the tower's reflective skin and slender profile camouflage with the landscape, end quote. Having personally seen an artist's rendition of this monstrosity, I'd say it's more of a criminalist act. It's this lovely village surrounded by gorgeous mountains, and then there's a 1,250-foot phallus. I imagine from space it looks like some kind of porn. Hey, is that a giant steel and glass tower in your valley, or are you just happy to see me? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Frank. Our first guest today is Myrick Howard. He is president of Preservation North Carolina since, the Great War of Northern Aggression, Myrick?
Well, I don't quite go back that far. You said I needed to be on the program because it was 140 years.
Yes.
You did not go back that far.
Since 1978, actually, Myrick has headed the group hailed by the National Park Service as the premier statewide organization in the South, if not America. He practically invented the way communities now deal with financing historic properties. Long busy with saving churches, Victorians, mill houses, and rural downtowns, Myrick now finds himself saving 50-plus-year-old modernist buildings, a style many people have a really hard time thinking of as historic. So welcome to the show, Myrick.
Thank you so much.
I'm also thrilled to have a great friend of the show, actress Kelly Lynch. You've seen her in Drugstore Cowboy, Roadhouse, and Charlie's Angels. Now, she turned down the role of Catherine Tamel in 1992's Basic Instinct that went to Sharon Stone, but we love her for some other movies. Visual Acoustics, The Modernism of Julius Schulman, Infinite Space, The Architecture of John Lautner, and The Euler House, Richard Neutra's Desert Retreat. She has a new movie, Frontier, that just opened up at the South by Southwest Festival, and with her husband, writer-producer Mitch Glazer, Kelly owns and has restored 2 spectacular mid-century homes designed by Richard Neutra and John Lautner. She's working on a pilot for mid-century modern design, which will incorporate helping homeowners with renovation and new groovy sources for salvage, furnishings, craftspeople, and local flea markets. She's leading a preservationist movement in Los Angeles and is on the board of the John Lautner Foundation and involved with Neutra's VDL House. Welcome, Kelly Lynch.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here. It's such an honor.
Well, thank you both for coming today. I'd like to ask you, Kelly, did you fall into modernism sort of late in life as you were, married and had kids and were looking for houses, or did you catch this fever early on?
It's funny. I caught it very early on. A friend of mine, her father was actually, he's long gone. He passed away many years ago, but he was an architect at the Bauhaus, Bruce Abramson, and was trained there. And he had all these great architecture books in their house, and they had a glass and steel house, which was an eyesore in the neighborhood to everybody but me. I saw this place, and I went crazy. And besides the father, the whole family thought I was nuts. And at that point, I would, come over to play with my friend Annie, but basically I would be piling through all the books Bruce had in his library, looking at these fantastic pictures of this, who I thought was the greatest architect of all, Julius Schulman, only to find out that he just had a photo credit, right? But I just thought, these are the best houses ever. I want to live like this. And, it started as a kid redecorating my room, making modernist forts. My girlfriends were playing with Barbie. I was doing Barbie, modernist dream house. I mean, there was the modernist Barbie dream house in the 60s that I never quite got for Christmas. But, I was making my own version of it. And it just continued on until I finally moved from Minnesota, where I'm from, to New York, to L.A., and basically called Julius Schulman on the phone. You used to be able to just pick up the phone and call him, tracked him down. And Crosby Doe, the great, architectural historian, realtor here in L.A., and started my modernist history education in L.A., which North Carolina is a real close one to L.A., but I think L.A. has the greatest collection of mid-century architecture, and we're really, really trying to save as much of it as possible, which is not easy.
Well, when you were growing up in Minnesota, now, you spent some time at the Guthrie Theater, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which was designed, their first building was designed by Ralph Rapson.
Exactly. Exactly.
who was very well known in that area and had a bunch of houses. Did you ever cruise around lusting after some of those?
I sure did. There were a few of them around those great lakes we have that are, right in the middle of the city of Minneapolis. And it was a joy to me to go to the Walker and the Guthrie, to be in those spaces, and I was very, very upset when they tore the buildings down and remodeled it and separated the two of them, because it was, it was like watching my history and my past just get wiped away. I mean, I have pictures and I have memories, but our history and architecture is really, really important. And we're very, very quick to knock down the groovy, 1950s diner and build the fake 1950s diner right on top of it, But, that was a tough one for me. I love the two buildings there.
Now, we mentioned earlier that you turned down the role that went to Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct, and Frank has a question for you about that decision.
Yeah, my question would be, Kelly, is if they'd offer you the role that Sharon Stone eventually took, that you turned down, if they'd offered it to you and allowed you to do the famous scene, that most famous scene in a Barcelona chair, would you have accepted the role in the movie?
You read my mind. I can't
We know
do this in this tacky sort of police room, a nondescript chair. Let's do it on something Eames, something Barcelona. Exactly. That was the deal breaker.
Actually, I was thinking maybe it'd be better on the Italian techno chair with 50 positions, but that's just a little too hip for some of the people listening.
All right, P.S. I have one. P.S. in the Oiler House.
It was a gift, I believe, from your husband.
Hello. First thing you ever got me, just saying.
That's, the first thing I ever gave my wife was a jacket from L.L. Bean.
Nice.
And I gave it to her, and she said to me, "This is really sweet. It's a corduroy. It's called a Weekender." She goes, "A Weekender jacket. This is the first thing a boy ever gave me that I didn't have to get treated for." So those first gifts. That's an honest-to-God true story. Kelly, I do have another question for you. Of all the awards, because I went and looked, you're all over the Google machine. Of all the awards, I'm guessing your favorite award that you and your husband have ever won, as it were, was the Vanity Fair's Best Dressed Couple award. I think that was, is that right up there, at least in your top 4 or 5?
Well, what's so funny is it's up there. My favorite award is the House Beautiful Giants of Design Award that I won for architectural preservation. That is my truly favorite, and it really meant something to me that I was acknowledged for that with my husband. But I got to say, the funniest part about the, best dressed is in one of the pictures I'm wearing, I think it's a very groovy black dress, but it was, I think, $15 at a thrift shop, which is my favorite thing about getting that award, because, most of these starlets and so forth are being dressed by stylists, and, in borrowed clothing that costs, the dress costs $15,000. Any girl could be the best dressed girl in something like that. It's kind of cheating. So I was just so thrilled that, one of the the two outfits they had photographed me in, one of them, like I said, was $15 from a really groovy thrift shop here in L.A. Ha!
Yeah, and I think at a $15,000 dress, I could have gotten the best dressed woman.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So, Kelly, you in 1992 took, I guess, your first foray into modernist ownership when you bought a Richard Neutra house set among the boulders of the Lone Pine area of California.
Exactly.
Listeners may recognize it as a place where a lot of old-time Westerns were filmed. Tell us about how that house came to you.
Well, my husband and I, both New Yorkers, by way of Miami and myself, Minnesota, we're here doing, in Los Angeles doing our separate projects and, waiting to get back to New York. And all of a sudden I thought, I don't want to get back to New York. I want to find a house here. And we were both thinking along the same lines. And we talked to Crosby Doe, who we had found out was the guy.
He's the man.
I see he's coming up on your show. I can't wait to hear.
Yes.
He's just amazing. So he took us on this architectural journey and started showing us things, and they were wonderful but not quite right. We said, we really love Richard Neutra. he's really, like, we're looking for that sensibility. I really love what he's my favorite. And he said, well, I don't have anything quite right for you in L.A., but I have this place in Lone Pine, California, through the Mojave Desert in the foothills of the Sierra Mountains, and, you just go see it. It was a 3-hour drive from L.A. door to door. I remember we put a big bottle of water in the back seat just in case we broke down. It felt like the Sahara, like we were going to go through, like we didn't know what this desert meant, And it got more and more beautiful as we took the journey up into the Sierras. And by the time we saw the house, before we even opened the door, I said to Mitch, we have to buy this, It was so incredible. And it's in a place in California, Inyo County, which is the size of Los Angeles County, but only 2% of the county has any building on it. So you have these wide, open expanses of land. And, by the way, a lot of European tourists who are looking for cowboys and Indians, I think. But it's beautiful.
Where's John Wayne when you need him?
Right. I was like, I just saw a couple. There was a posse just went through town. But it was just not exactly what we were looking for. We were looking for a home in L.A., and we have that now. Years later, we got the right place for ourselves. We were renting a home in L.A., and we owned basically our vacation home in Lone Pine, California. And I was just there last weekend. It remains one of the most spectacular places I've ever been. It's a very modest home. I suggest to all of your listeners to go on iTunes and to rent or buy the Euler documentary, the Euler House, Richard Neutra's Desert Retreat. It's a 48-minute long documentary. It is so beautiful, and it's really also about Mr. Euler and his friendship with Richard Neutra. They were great friends, how this man basically with post-traumatic stress after World War II and being in Pearl Harbor kind of went from his Pasadena home to the desert, in California to basically find himself again and built this beautiful life for himself there and his family. It's really moving. And it helps explain, like you said, a lot of people are, a lot of people don't understand modernist architecture. This very middle America, adorable man and his very sweet family certainly did and certainly had a beautiful life altogether in this modern house. And my challenge to people is to find one of these houses and get inside one and start to see how it makes you feel. The pictures look so groovy and a little bit cold, but the experience of being in one, especially if you're a person like me who loves the outdoors, being able to be living in your house and yet communing with nature at the same time is a very special feeling, and I would say it's worth checking out for everybody.
So, Kelly, this was really the beginning of a lifelong addictive process that modernists know very well. It starts with a little furniture,
right.
And then you end up getting a house.
I know.
And in your case, you got another house in L.A. Tell us about that one.
Well, we are the proud owners, I should say, almost caretakers of Leo Harvey's Harvey House, which was built in 1950. It was the largest commission that the great architect John Lautner, who Frank Lloyd Wright called the world's second greatest architect, which tells you a little bit about what Frank Lloyd Wright thought about himself. It was his largest commission to date. And Leo Harvey was an industrialist. He bought a mountain in Los Angeles. It was a peaked mountain. He needed somebody who understood engineering and who could build a house on a piece of property like that. And he'd done some research, and John Lautner knew a lot about engineering as well as his fantastic design. And they worked together in 1949-50 to build this amazing house. Shortly after it was finished, it was filled to the brim with gilt Chinese, chinois, accoutrement of sort of velvet paintings of the Last Supper, giant reproductions of Rodin's The Thinker and the giant Moses. And
hold on 1 second, Kelly.
Packed. Yes.
Did you say Velvet Elvis? Did you?
Velvet paintings.
Yeah, Rodin.
Yeah.
This velvet paintings, Elvis paintings on velvet. So I'm sorry.
It was insane.
It just sounds one of these things doesn't belong with the other somehow. Right.
You're right. But none of it belonged with the other. So the point is, my friend Julia Schulman said, John Lautner and I wanted to photograph the house, but the second he finished the house, it was full of this crap. So the house was kind of unknown, through all the years. The Harveys passed away, and a man got the house at auction for $150,000 in the late 70s, and just basically used it to rescue animals. He lived in the neighborhood. He did a little bit of work on the house to try to make it look more quote-unquote normal. He added sheetrock over beautiful rock walls and things like this, and sort of left it to rot for, 20 years. And at one point, the neighbor said, yeah, there were goats up there and cats, and it was really, the smell was odd, I have to say, when we took a look at it. But anyway, Mitch and I heard about it. It's on a promontory. The piece of land is spectacular, and everybody who was looking at this house was looking at it to tear it down because, 2 acres of land on the top of the Hollywood Hills. One side is the Hollywood sign, and the other side of the hill is the Griffith Park Observatory. You see all of Los Angeles, almost a 360-degree view, and this incredible house, which was just patched up and full of, dead animal carcasses and God knows what. And we had to have the house. I mean, the site is ridiculous, but we bid on it. We got that place, and we started work. And literally, my mother threw herself in front of the front door saying, I will not let you buy this. And my manager at the time said, you're going to lose everything. You people are crazy. Well, long story short, we put a bit of money into it, but we've been offered 10 times all the money we've put in the house, including buying the house, every year since. And it was 1998 we bought the house. We moved in at the Millennium. And that's my point. If you think you're as good as a John Lautner or Richard Neutra or Frank Lloyd Wright, you go ahead and you redo your house any old way you want to. But if you want to invest in the property and if you understand that you own a work of art and that you're basically probably more like a caretaker, you should be a steward of that place, much like the show Downton Abbey. You've got that family trying to keep that house on the planet for posterity and history. That's what these homes are. These homes tell a story about who we were and where we were going, and it's just a shame. If you need to have like a giant walk-in closet or, a spa bathroom or these things, I would say, find a piece of property or a house that really is not much of something and then tear that down. And now here we are. This architecture is finally kind of catching up with our mindset, the minimalism, the indoor-outdoor, all of that stuff is we're kind of catching up with the vision of these people from 50, 60 years ago.
Now, Myrick Howard, you are an attorney. You have a background in city planning. You are a huge preservationist, having spoken in more than 40 states and 3 foreign countries. Tell us, how can homeowners like Kelly, who have something really special on their hands, what are some of the things they can do to protect their houses for future generations?
Well, I really hope that Kelly and others are putting preservation easements on their homes.
Tell us about those. Which
are basically legal agreements enforceable by a preservation organization or agency that preserves the property, make sure it doesn't get subdivided, et cetera. We've done preservation easements on a number of houses across the state. And I'll give you an example of one that we were involved in here where after the owner died, the realtor came to us and wanted to know a little bit about this preservation easement. The easement says no demolition, no alteration of certain things that are of significance to the house, limitation of new construction, not in our case saying no new construction, but we control the new construction, no cutting of trees, subdivision, et cetera. And the realtor comes to us and says, I really don't care about your easement. I'm going to go find a buyer for the land. And I said, well, I guess you don't care about your real estate license either, because, it's a legally binding document. And what's interesting to watch right now, and Kelly, you might comment on this as well. These houses are small in many cases. Sometimes the spaces are small. They don't meet what a lot of folks think of as modern, quote, requirements. I mean, the big walk-in closets and, bathrooms that you can ice skate around. It takes a special buyer, but it's one of those things where if you don't have that chance to find the special buyer, it's going to go for the land. the building goes away. And in so many cases, there's small houses on big lots.
Yeah, that's one of the things that has affected a lot of modernist houses in North Carolina. When we work on the North Carolina SModder site to save these, we're dealing with houses that have great aesthetic value, but the surrounding area has grown up around them, and that really causes the land to be worth more than the house in many, many cases, and apparently seems to limit the options of the owners or the heirs. But I've heard these preservation easements being described, Myrick, like homeowners association of one. So how easy is that for somebody to set up? I mean, is it complicated and expensive?
What you need to do is find a preservation organization, and Lord knows in this country there are plenty of them, and most preservationists are very much interested in the preservation of modernism. It's just one more part of the spectrum there. I mean, there's a continuum of history going through. So it's finding a preservation organization. They're these easements can be adapted to every site. So it's figuring out what works. And in some cases, there's also an opportunity to take a tax deduction. If you do certain things, if the property is on the National Register, many of these properties are now eligible and in some cases already on the National Register. National Register typically is 50 years, but in some cases with special significance, it can go even less than 50 years. Let's find a preservation organization, get a sample easement, work it up, protect what you think is important about the property. In a lot of cases, the biggest doggone thing is subdivision of the land. If you can get a control on the subdivision of the land, get a control on demolition, and get some control over new construction. New construction, again, it's not that you can't do it. You might want to say no more than X number of square feet.
So that it's compatible with the existing structure, too, I would
Correct.
imagine.
Absolutely.
Now, Kelly, your mom, I guess when she threw herself in front of you and forbids you to buy the house, you've definitely proven her wrong. But there are a lot of people who don't like modern and are just not into it. But have been probably converted by visiting your house and visiting others. I mean, what can the modernist movement do to get people to be more comfortable with this kind of design, both for new construction and also for the preservation of the past?
Well, I think, for here in Los Angeles, there were a couple things that really shifted the town as far as people's awareness of what exists right here. One was a Museum of Contemporary Art had a 200 Years of Architecture show at one of their annexed museum areas downtown off the main museum, and it was absolutely the most well-attended show in the history of the museum. And they had beautiful models of, for instance, Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water, but it came up all from Japanese architecture through the sort of green and green craftsman architecture to the the Schindler House, and the birth of California modernism, really, which is what happened with Rudolf Schindler and Richard Neutra living in that incredibly modern Kings Road house, which I suggest people look up as well, the Schindler Kings Road house, built in 1922. It is my favorite house on the planet. It's still the most modern house. An example of how we could live even today communally together, and they were the original hippies, the Schindlers, and Bohemian, and but the Schindler House is now owned by the Mack Center, an Austrian museum, and the VDL House, which is Richard Neutra's private home and research center on Silver Lake. Those two homes, which are historic, and so many architects worked and lived in both places. Gregory Ames, Raphael Soriano, Donald Wexler were all architects who lived and apprenticed with Neutra at the VDL House. Those are both open to the public. I mean, and are very well, they are. It's like walking into a piece of history. And you have student docents at VDL House from Cal Poly Pomona who owns the home right now, and it's absolutely great. And once you're in these places, you take a second to sit down and look out the windows and sort of imagine a life like this. And these lives were lived in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, all the way through. These houses had people living in them and loving them, and they're still here. I think you start to shift. People come into the house. I remember a woman once at a tour said, "Where's your cozy corners?" I was like, "What?" She's like, "Where's your puffy, where do you watch TV?" And I started to bring her around and sit her down and show her, where we watch TV, this is where we hang out, this room we do, And I couldn't, everyone had gone back into the bus, and I couldn't get her out of my house. She's like, "This is the coolest thing ever." But she came in very, like, I don't get it. And it's like I just took her in. I let her just experience the house and sit in it, and I told her how we live, and this is where we have our brunch, and this is how we hang out. We have a party. We go in this room for this, and all of a sudden she saw a life in here, and that's kind of what it is. The pictures are beautiful, and they're interesting, especially for people who love architecture, mid-century architecture. But going into these homes and tours, I know you brought a group, George, to the Lautner house. It was so great, and everybody was, really interested. They had an amazing tour. They saw so much of Los Angeles, fantastic mid-century architecture, and they were really, really happy to see the Lautner and all of that. I know they were probably already interested in it, but it would have been one thing to show them slides of the Lautner house, the Harvey house, but for all of them to be able to be in it and to see how it works as a house and what it is to have, be in a place like this, that's really what's important.
You're going to love this. I have my own version of the story of the mother and buying a house. In the late 70s, I'm buying a Victorian house, wraparound porch, and my mother says, your father and I worked all these years so you wouldn't have to do something like this. This whole continuum is coming along. I remember the first time I went to my board member about our buying a Victorian house to save it, and one of the board members just kind of he might as well just spat in my face because he was just kind of like, "Why are we doing this? These houses are not important. They're too recent. They're not well built, etc." And with a lot of these arguments, it's kind of like you can take this snapshot of 1980 conversation about Victorian houses and move it over to 2015, and it's the same kinds of conversations. And many of the things that were done in the 1970s, 80s to bring interest into the modern movement is going to be having tours, having people see the houses, see magazines, see it in the newspaper. Here in Raleigh, we had quite the battle royal about a modernist house being built in, really not even a really modernist house, a more just contemporary house being built in a local historic district. And it was interesting how many people got it, that's okay. That's continuum of history. We don't, history didn't stop 50 years ago. We want to continue it on, and these houses represent our lifetimes.
That's a great point.
People don't like what their parents built, but they love what their grandparents built. And we just got to get there long enough that these houses. And what's been interesting from our standpoint, we're trying to find, trying to deal with easements on properties that we're still dealing with the first generation that built them in many cases. In many cases, they built the houses in their 30s. They're now in their 70s or 80s. And they can't quite get there of why this is important. Whereas if it had been their grandfather's house, it'd be a slam dunk.
So let me ask you both, and I'll ask Myrick first. Victorians and then mill houses and then mills, after some initial resistance, became generally accepted within the preservation community for being saved. Modernist houses, not so much. They were controversial when they started, and we've seen across North Carolina a number of communities like city councils in Greensboro and Charlotte who rejected over 50-year-old modernist houses for inclusion as historic structures because basically they looked modern. They didn't look old. I mean, how do we deal with that perception problem for these houses that are ahead of their time?
Well, quite frankly, in the early 80s, they would have rejected the Victorian houses for that landmark status in the same kind of language and same sort of stupidity. But this stuff moves forward, and I think that the preservation community is very much on board. I mean, when you kind of look at it, the National Trust has, the Glass House in Connecticut. They have the I'm drawing a blank here on the name of Mies van der Rohe House in Illinois that they went to the mat to save a number of years ago. I think the preservation community is on board. The general public, maybe not so much. Okay. And that's where we probably need to be working and recognizing that, it is a continuum. And just as there are some lousy Victorian houses, there's some lousy modernist houses too. And, it's not all perfection. But I think there will increasingly be interest in doing this. It's going to be interesting to watch the suburbs, though, and the land issue.
I think you're right. I think it's a lot about the land. I think we, as a culture, are accepting these houses more. I mean, you see the sweet lady with her, the groceries and the little kids parked in front of a groovy post and beam 60s house now. It used to be just the bad guys had modernist houses in any kind of advertising or movies. Now you're seeing, it's sort of being sold as here we are, we're just a regular family, like the people who originally built them, or some of them just, regular people. But I think you're right. I think the land issue is what's really scary and at stake.
Mm-hmm. Now, Kelly, last question. Do you have another house in you? You think there might be a third one in the home? Well,
I almost bought Schindler's Buck House, which I came inches to, my husband and I, and a really amazing couple bought it who work at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art and did a beautiful restoration of it. It's an absolutely spectacular gem. And, if I feel that something's wavering and, I try to use the press. I try to use, my different soldiers to get awareness of something maybe getting torn down. I'm pressuring now several communities, Malibu and Beverly Hills, to have preservation clauses in their communities, because there aren't. Some areas in California are protected and most are not, and people can tear down whatever they want. But we're kind of. We've got a team of people now. We've saved quite a bit, and we're working on that still. And I guess if something really seems dire and there's no one to step in, I might just swoop in and get another one. You never know. I hope my husband's not listening to this.
Well, Kelly and Myrick, thank you very much for being on our first show.
Thank you.
We love it, and I hope to have you back.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. What a great thing to have for everyone to listen to. I can't wait to. I'm going to have a program myself to listen to every single one. I really appreciate it.
If you're living in the Raleigh-Durham area, North Carolina Modernist Houses is going to Historic Charlotte's Mad About Modern Tour on May 9th. Spend the day on our luxury bus, hooked up to free Wi-Fi as we tour the Queen City's most interesting houses. Get more information at ncmodernist.org and look under tours. Meanwhile, follow us on Twitter at US Modernist. If you'd like to get on our newsletter, go to usmodernistradio.org or email us with your comments at usmodernistradio.org. US Modernist Radio is sponsored by Modbox USA and their swanky, colorful, stylish, retro, mid-century modernist mailboxes, and by Sarah Sonk, the real estate agent who loves modernist houses just as much as you do. 919-601-7339. For myself and Frank King, say hello, Frank.
Hey, and you know what? I'm sorry I didn't get to ask Myrick what in the heck is the order of the longleaf pine, but we'll have to leave that for next time around.
Next time.
Thanks for listening. I'm George Smart. Take us out, Tom.
Visit US Modernist Radio on the web at usmodernistradio.org for additional resources mentioned today on the show. US Modernist Radio is recorded at Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. I'm Tom Guild. George and Frank and I will be back in 2 weeks for another cantilevered floor-to-ceiling, less is more, concrete and steel edition of US Modernist Radio. Meanwhile, follow us on Twitter at US Modernist. US Modernist Radio is a production of North Carolina Modernist Houses, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design.